So where does that leave us, right? Bottom up organizing, not top down mobilizing. And I think those are good. That's an important distinction. Not just the bottom up and top down, but organizing versus mobilizing, right? And we talked about this kind of in our organizing workshops in the past. The difference between advocacy and mobilizing and organizing. And I can't remember, I don't think it was Lee Staples that gave us that, but I can't remember who we were quoting with that. But advocacy is what we have in the major parties, right? The expectation that a organization of power will advocate for you on behalf of your issues, which clearly doesn't pan out in real, in the real world. Then there's mobilizing, which is bringing out your base to pass your things, right? It's very one directional. It's very, top down and oriented towards completing goals that are established by elites. And then there's bottom up organizing, where not only are we trying to mobilize our people, right? Obviously, when we organizing, the first thing we do is find our socialists, right? The first thing we do is find the people that want to form an organization like we do. So we start with our people, but a key part of organizing is changing minds. A key part, and if we aren't doing that, then we aren't going to be forming a mass party, right? To form a mass party, we have to change the collective consciousness. We have to not only get all the socialists into the streets, but convince the majority of America that socialists aren't evil demons.
One way that I like to describe the organizing is organizers should be planning to kind of put themselves out of work. That your major goal as an organizer is to train other organizers and let them go off and do things. And that is how we not only educate about socialist ideas, but it's also how we kind of build that trust and that solidarity that's necessary in order to build a mass working class organization, because we're I don't mean it that way, but we're encouraging communities to represent themselves, to learn the skills necessary to organize themselves and to create democratic structures for self-governance among themselves. Like Chris was saying earlier, it's of the people, not for the people. And so that's the heart of organizing here. The concept of advocacy versus mobilizing versus organizing, I think that comes from Jane McAlevey, who is a major union organizer. And she has a book called There's No Shortcuts, and I always like that phrase too. There's no shortcuts to organizing power. We have to understand that this is kind of a long-term, protracted struggle that's not going to get resolved in one election cycle. Or even a few election cycles. It's a long-term process of changing the culture and the economic system into the eco-socialist system that we want to see.
Yeah, and I think that the key thing that we need to remember when we're talking bottom up, is that that's where we can actually change minds. Right, I said we need to build this mass party, that we need to overcome, the propagandizing that our population has had about, the left and socialist ideals, to the point that, like, a couple weeks ago, it was even in The Last of Us, right, where it's like, that sounds like communism, and it's like, no, it's not communism, and then the wife jumps in, we live on a commune, it's communism, right? We've got to get past that, right? And when we're talking about, even something like this, right? When we're talking about talking to people on social media, talking to national level organizations, it's hard to break through, right? But where we can actually have success breaking through is bottom up with our neighbors in our community, right? A couple quick, things that brings to mind is, last winter there was a well-known activist in my community, and we had a real bad snowstorm. And they were driving, I don't remember where they were going, driving home or whatever, and they saw someone off the side of the road. So they pulled over, jumped out, pushed them out. And I bet they did this a couple dozen times over the course of the day, or the course of the 24 hours where we had the bad snow and the roads were bad. They just made it a point to go out and help people, right? Because that's what socialists tend to do. And they helped push this guy out. And the guy afterwards shook their hand and I said, "I'm Bob." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm Bill." And the guy went like this and he said, "You're not like how I thought you were." Right? His reputation as a leftist organizer preceded him. His name was known amongst right-wingers. But when one of them met him on the streets, he helped them, right? And it broke that, right? The next time he hears, all that guy's this, that, and another thing, he's probably at least internally going to think, yeah, but he's a nice guy who helped out when I needed it. Even if he doesn't say it, right? There's a crack in the bauble. There's a stress point that we can exploit, right? I'm a situationist. When we see those, we hit them. And that's one way we can create those cracks is through those interpersonal interactions with people in our community. I had another friend who ran an anarchist community space in a sundown town of 5,000 people in central Illinois. If you don't know what a sundown town is, it's a town where historically black folks needed to leave by sundown. That's where the name came from, right? So we're talking think exactly what you probably stereotypically think when I say downstate Illinois, right? A town that has had all of its manufacturing leave, very, very, very conservative, lots of reactionary and problematic views. And my friend's running an anarchist space that has an anarcho-capitalist flag painted 2 stories tall on the front of the building, right? Bullet holes in the windows from people driving by and taking pot shots. But on one occasion, he had a gentleman in a suit walk in, hand him $500 and say, "I hate everything that you stand for, but you're the only person in this town who's doing anything for the kids." Right? He still didn't like him as a person. He thought his politics were shit, but he had to give him credit. He had to support the only person doing the work. And that same friend has sat down with, people who are friends with the people who are shooting his windows out, right? And had conversations. And at the end, they say, "Well, that's what you're talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." And there's like, people wouldn't want to shoot you if they knew that was what you were talking about. Like, he literally got told that. Like, I know people who want to kill you, but if they sat down and had this conversation, they wouldn't. So I think it's really important to, remember that when we're talking about bottom-up organizing, it's not just about the broader strategy, but about the fact that it's actually the one place we can reach people, right? We can't reach people screaming at a stranger on the internet. We can't, we very rarely reach people standing at a mass protest, right? Where we reach them is talking to the people in our community. So that was a big, way tangent.
It was a good one, and it's related to these points here, I think, actually, because it's I think those opportunities for interpersonal actions where in communications where you can change minds. A lot of that happens when, like you're saying, you get involved in your community to do things that the local establishment has forgotten about, the local power structures have forgotten about. And that applies to a lot of the people in those communities themselves. The Democratic electoral machine likes to call them apathetic, that they don't care about politics, because if they cared, they would come out and vote in the primary. That's not true for most of them. Most of them feel completely alienated by this system. They don't feel represented by it, and they recognize how hard it is to make it change, and they feel demoralized by that. So they've simply withdrawn from the process altogether. They say, why should I even waste my time on this? Because no one's going to listen to me. No one's going to do anything. No one's going to fix it. I might as well stay in my community and give $500 to the anarchist who's actually doing something. And when you look at polls, like half of registered voters are independents. Like, they already don't really believe in the Republican-Democrat divide. And that's half of all voters. When you look at actually all voting age population, like half of the population isn't even registered to vote or doesn't vote and that sort of thing. And that's actually where our base is. That's actually the members that we need to be reaching out to and recruiting and talking to them and saying, We understand why you're alienated. We understand why you feel demoralized. And the answer to those things is to organize, to get together with other members in our community and start linking those communities together into a larger mass movement where we can actually have the working class power to change these things and represent ourselves and get the policies that we want passed, and not just what the Democratic or Republican elite tell us that they're going to do. So that's where this bottom up organizing starts from. It's from those very personal conversations, getting involved in your community and reaching out to the people that this system has forgotten, because there's a lot of those people who are forgotten and are just not sure where to start. And if we can start those conversations with them, they'll get involved.
So what does it mean to bottom up organize, right? It means the ruling middle class political. So what we're talking about is the ruling middle class political alliance only prevails in elections because the working class votes in low numbers, right? Many members of the working class feel alienated, demoralized at the prospects of making change against the elites. It's not apathy, but a lack of organization to change. And I'll also, say here, you'll see this explode in your community every once in a while, right? Where all of a sudden, like someone in your neighborhood is just pissed off at your alder person and they run, right? There's somebody down the block from me that he's a write-in, and our alder person is who is behind him being kicked off the ballot, right? That it was that person's people who challenged his signatures. And I wish I would have, this is a failing on my part, right? That I'm not engaged enough doing this door knocking I'm not practicing what I preach. But I wish I would have known that he was running and collecting signatures when he was running and collecting signatures, because that's where I have experience, right, as a third person with a third party, knowing what's needed to overcome, the challenges that are going to come. So we see this, right? And if you look at your community, I think almost all of our communities will see it, where you have that flash of like a candidate that's just running because someone pissed them off, right? And that means it's one of the many signals that there is a demand for independent politics. There is demand for an alternative party. There is a demand for something different, and we have to be there ready for those flashpoints, right? Because if my Green Party had basically a bomb set off in the middle of it last year because of some stuff that happened with a member, like, we might have been prepared to lift that person up in that moment, in that flashpoint, right, and support them. So again, people aren't apathetic; they're alienated, and they withdraw from it because you can only participate in your own destruction consciously for so long, right? It wears down on you, and you either do one of two things: you explode and run a firebrand grassroots campaign that loses, or you withdraw and you focus your efforts elsewhere in your community. We can build, so we need to build a base by filling the political vacuum for this working class, right? We need to prioritize outreach to Black, Latinx communities, color, youth, queer folks, across the board, the oppressed and marginalized, right? If you're in an area that has, if you're in a more rural area, like, rural folks are marginalized as hell, right? Rural communities have been completely abandoned economically, politically, across the board. The reason that we see this deep red, rural divide in the United States, in my opinion, is more because that no one else but the Republicans is there, right? They've been abandoned by the Democrats. They've been abandoned by socialists. They've been abandoned by progressives. All they have is libertarians and Republicans. And they're there to stir hate, right? And to blame others for the problems that are actually caused by capitalism, right? The collapse of the small farm is because of capitalism. The outsourcing of rural manufacturing is because of capitalism. The effects of climate change are because of capitalism, right? But the only people they have speaking to them are capitalists. So we need to kind of qualify the lead and think about who we're talking to. And another, I think, key thing when we're qualifying the lead is who has material interest in change, right? If someone who's going to, hypothetical, who's going to fight harder for Medicare for all, the uninsured person or the union member with a sweet, contract negotiated deal, Well, the AFL-CIO and their opposition to Medicare for all tells us that, right? They're gonna bail on it, right? And it's not true across the board, right? There are people of privilege who have health insurance who will fight tooth and nail for it. But most of the time, I'm going to place my money that when the going gets tough, it's the person who needs it, the person with that material interest that's going to, stick through to the end and not take a buy off half measure. Organizing means we need to be facilitating working class folks getting together to make their own decisions, learn democratic processes through experience. Our society doesn't encourage this. Our society doesn't encourage democratic decision making. Our society doesn't encourage, collective discussion. It came up in my personal life with someone, with something recently, just the realization that our society does not provide avenues for conflict resolution, for restorative justice, for any of these things, right? So we have to condition ourselves and train ourselves to actually do these things, to break the mold of authoritarianism that we're living in and raised in. That means, educational and social movement projects, not only electoral campaigns. We've got to be part of the organizing, right? We've got to be in our communities 24/7, 365, not just coming around for finite campaigns. And when we do come around for a finite campaign, we need to start at the bottom, right? We need to start with ideally people from the movement, right? Not someone coming in to advocate, but someone who wants to speak for themselves and their community.